What is going on, everybody? And welcome to the Forever Green Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Seamus Zarlingo. Alongside of me, oh no, I missed the point, Mr. Nick Franco. Franco, I'm rattled. I missed the point just now. I mean, the second podcast in, or actually third podcast, I should say, and I missed the point. It was bound to happen at one point or the other. Oh, no pun intended there. But Franco, how we doing today?
I mean, we've been biting at the nips to get on this podcast. I mean, over the past weekend, we have just been filled. Usually it's just pipe dreams and usually just people saying ifs, woulds, coulds, shoulds. But we are getting some actual steam that Giannis Antetokounmpo might be joining the Boston Celtics.
Yeah, I mean, do you see the bottom of the screen? This whole podcast is going to be about Giannis Antetokounmpo. Everything that's come out about his potential trade destination, and we do think 100% Giannis will be traded in the next 2 weeks leading up to the draft. Not even 2 weeks, the next week. The draft is 1 week from tonight, Franco, and all of the intel states Giannis will be traded before the draft. So really, within the next week, Giannis is expected to be on a different team. And right now, looking at the odds out there, Miami with a 45% chance right now to land Giannis, according to the odds market. But Boston, the Boston Celtics in second at a 41% chance. And if you look at the back and forth, Boston spiked up. So on June 18th, around 5 p.m., rather, actually, I should say, not June 18th. What am I talking about? That date has not existed yet. June 10th, they have a slash through the 10. Sorry, guys. I thought it was an 8. But really, June 10th, around 5 p.m., all of a sudden, the Celtics, they started to rise within the odds. And then June 11th, it really took off. The Celtics spiked all the way from owning an 8.4% chance to land Giannis. With the Heat at that point in time, June 11th, 12 a.m., Miami owned a 64.8% chance to land Giannis. Boston only 8.4% chance on the odds market. Yet after that point, where we're at right now, Miami holding a 45% chance, Boston spiking all the way up to 41%. And that feels significant when the odds market is reacting to all the rumors. And let's face it, the rumors, we've seen a ton of them. I mean, just the posts coming after another, one after another. I'm putting it down on our spreadsheets here, and I'm going, I mean, my Lord, there's just rumor after rumor after rumor. You wouldn't think there's this many rumors, but everyone's unloading the clip. Every single NBA reporter is unloading the clip on Giannis at this given moment in time. But Franco, seeing Miami and Boston seem to be the leaders with some other candidates. You know, Minnesota has been mentioned. Orlando's been mentioned for Giannis. We talked about San Antonio, Oklahoma City, and Houston last year. They appear to be out of the mix. But looking at where the situation's at now, Franco, where do you see Giannis landing within the next week?
We have, right now, you usually don't have your phone off of do not disturb while you're recording. But I'm going to avoid what happened to us last time with A.J. Brown. We didn't know about A.J. Brown until like 27 minutes later, and it was just like there it is. And we were able to fire out a clip for you guys and get our initial reaction. But right now, we are on Giannis watch. I mean, within the sources that have came out, it all started off with Bill Simmons really just what we're doing right now, riffing on a podcast about potential ideas, potential trades that could happen, and saying, hey, Boston could be interested in Giannis. And that is a really key word within our industry, in the sports media industry. Could mean anything. I mean, it doesn't say any inclinations of a trade, doesn't say any sources or any such of that. It just throws a hypothetical out there. And that hypothetical slowly generated and what happened rapidly ended up being a full-blown considerations. And from one of the best sources in the NBA, Brian Windhorst, he let us in on the fact that, which was already pretty known by the Boston market, is the Celtics front office is pretty good with having closed doors on what they are doing with trades, transactions, things of that sort. You really don't usually get that many hints of what is going to happen within a Celtics trade. Usually you're caught blindsided when Brad Stevens makes a trade at the trade deadline. When he has everyone looking one direction, he's doing a sleight of hand the other. And really, this Giannis conversation is more logical than we would have thought, because at first you would look at that type of deal and how much of a momentum shift it would be within the East. But for both sides, and I would assume a third team will be added to this deal, and we'll get further into details about that. It makes a lot more sense for the Boston Celtics to be in on a player like Giannis than a team like Miami, because Miami right now is just frantically looking for a face of the franchise, and Giannis would definitely do that for them. But the one thing that Miami doesn't have and Boston does is assets to make this happen. Miami is going to offer up their youth in contention and possibly Tyler Hero and some assets around that. But other than that, the draft capital is weak. And also they're still suffering from the Jimmy Butler trade. So I'm seeing Miami being a great team for Giannis if he were to wait out his contract with Milwaukee and sign a actual deal there via free agency, which we haven't seen in a very long time, since possibly Kevin Durant was the last notable free agent that would sign a maximum deal on the market.
There are a couple of things to get into there. First of all, in terms of hearing things from front offices, there have been murmurs about no one really hearing much out of Boston and no one really hearing much out of Milwaukee as well. And it puts into question where the rumors are actually coming from, where the leaks are in, where the cracks are, where the leaks are coming out within these organizations. But typically, good organizations and good franchises don't leak information without a strategic purpose behind it. And if you do have leaks from, say franchises across the league, some franchises, we all know internally, it's not as cohesive as it is, say, with the Boston Celtics, who have been in contention for most of this decade and seem to have a pretty tight-knit group within the ownership circle, at least from what we've seen early on within the Bill Chisholm era, alongside Wick Rosbeck, who's still going to be a voice inside the building. But particularly in Boston, you don't hear much of what goes on behind the scenes. Danny Ainge, you never hear much. Brad Stevens, you never hear much. And right now, it does put into question where the rumors are actually coming from within this whole Giannis search. But the whole question to start this out was, where does Giannis land? So from your perspective, Franco, you believe the Celtics are going to land Giannis? Is that where your head's at right now?
At this point, with where the direction of the trade potential candidates have dwindled.
So by this time next week, 1 week from tonight, will be the first round of the NBA draft. You believe Giannis will be in a Celtics jersey?
Yes. I think that will be...
That was a hesitant yes. There was some hesitancy to say yes there. But that's really the key question here, is who's going to land Giannis? Because there's another perspective in all this, in saying, are the Celtics just involved to drive the price of Miami's offer to the roof? Because if you're the Celtics, you're sitting there going, if Miami gets Giannis, they're a threat to us. But if we can get them to just give up more and more and more for Giannis, it might lessen their chances of actually beating the Celtics in the future
Well,
with,
what's the
say,
maximum
a
that
Brown and
Miami
Tatum led
give
team.
up? I mean, it's either they're going to want to keep either Tyler Hero or Bam Adebayo. It's a either or situation. I'm sure they're more inclined to keep Bam Adebayo on the roster, and they are just flooded with young assets, but there really isn't that key piece that is going to set the edge for the Milwaukee Bucks to accept a trade from the Miami Heat. I mean, Tyler Hero is a great asset, but it is no cornerstone or young franchise piece that Milwaukee is looking to obtain in return for Giannis. And who knows, maybe Miami is able to work out a trade and a deal that gets a third team involved to give that prospect elsewhere. But outside of what Miami has offered already, it seems like they're already emptying their pockets and they're just finding more lint because they've already spent everything they had in the prior years of this decade trying to win a championship and falling short and now paying the repercussions for it. However, they do have a lot of money coming off the books with Norman Powell becoming a free agent and unrestricted free agent, and also Terry Rozier's contract will be lifted as well, which was around $22 million. So that's around $50 million freeing up off their books. I'm not sure if that's effective as of this year or would go into effect next year, but really, if you're Miami, you are hoping Miami or Giannis somehow hits the free agency market this year, but they just simply do not have the assets to get this deal done.
What's interesting about Miami compared to Boston, if we're comparing offers, we don't know what the offers were. We can only speculate. And you can draw some conclusions based on the team's rosters and arsenal of picks, of course, and even team position where they're slotted within their timeline. But Miami, it feels as if Miami can create a package with a little more talent than Boston, specifically for Milwaukee. And that's not saying, say Boston, they can create a package where they're adding a top 5 MVP finisher from last season and Jaylen Brown into the package, where, again, that would become enticing because that would essentially reroute Brown to Milwaukee and then away to potentially a third team, as we're hearing. Atlanta's been mentioned, New Orleans been mentioned, Houston, Portland as well. Those are really the primary teams.
Clippers,
Los Angeles, the Clippers mentioned
5
earlier in the 5th pick. Nobody knows what the Clippers are going to do with the 5th pick, but could be involved with Jaylen Brown. Who knows? But Boston could give up Jaylen Brown to Milwaukee, who could then reroute him elsewhere to a team like Portland and et cetera, all the teams we just mentioned. But looking at what the Heat could give up for Milwaukee, there are a couple of pieces in there, say a Jaime Jaquez, say a Khalil Ware, where the Bucks could be attaining a younger player or younger players who are not the caliber of a Jaylen Brown, of course, or even a Tyler Hero for that matter. But these younger players could give Milwaukee a little bit of an establishment, and then guys like, say, Hero or Brown would be rerouted elsewhere. But say Miami's package, just looking at them real quick, which I'm going to go pull up their salary sheet here. So Miami, if Bam Adebayo, if he's not in the deal and it's Tyler Hero, so say it's Tyler Hero, who are the guys that are going in that deal? You have a Jaquez, you have a Ware, a Jovic potentially, a Davion Mitchell. You could say Andrew Wiggins could be a potential salary filler if Milwaukee wants to take back his contract for whatever reason. And he has a player option though, so it's to be foreseen if he actually picks that up or not. He might not pick that up. Who knows? $30 million for Andrew Wiggins. That seems like a lot of money.
Want to.
But Miami, it feels as if the players after Hero could be a little bit better. Say a Davion Mitchell again, like you could mention him within this whole equation. Feels like it could be a little bit better than Boston, where Boston, yes, you're giving up Jaylen Brown, but Jaylen Brown's not going to be a part of the team, much like Tyler Hero probably wouldn't be a part of the Bucks either. I would say, and that's what puts into question Milwaukee as well, trading with Miami. Do they really want a Tyler Hero? Is that really what? And even thinking about the rerouting situation between Tyler Hero and Jaylen Brown, Tyler Hero might net you less than Jaylen Brown. And I say might, does net you less than Jaylen Brown because Jaylen Brown owns a legitimate market right now. You see multiple teams coming out interested in Jaylen Brown versus Tyler Hero. We're not hearing the same thing about Tyler Hero. We're just not. And he's a fine player, don't get me wrong, but I think he's a little bit overpaid for what he's worth. You could say the same thing about Brown, but Brown, there's a little bit more stigma considering he was just top 5 in MVP voting and just came off an incredible season. And there are multiple teams out there looking for their 1A superstar who, let's face it, Brown's not been that guy next to Jason Tatum, and Jason Tatum is expected to be that guy next year again. But Boston, I would say the players behind the picks, this is actually my main point here, is Miami, it seems as if Miami could give up better players at the top in terms of collection of players. Boston could give the best player up within a Giannis trade, but Boston could ultimately offer Miami, not Miami, Milwaukee, a boatload of picks in this scenario. And that's where I feel as if Boston, if you really look at their package, what the potential could be there, you do have some guys on the back end too. Hugo Gonzalez, Baylor Shireman. You think about those guys. Sam Hauser, you could throw him into a deal now. Does Milwaukee really want him? Who knows? He could be going home, of course, to his home state. But Jordan Walsh, does his name arise within a potential deal? You look even Derek White. Derek White, I feel like, is very expendable this summer because he just displayed clear regression. And next year he'll be making $30.3 million, and the next year after that, 32.6, and then 34.8, and that's a hefty amount of salary for a guy who just showed a little bit of regression on the basketball court last season. But in terms of the packages from where these two teams sit at this moment in time, you're saying the edge would be in Boston's favor, right?
I would, because right now, I mean, you look at those players, they are great potential players and great assets. I mean, you look at a player like Jaquez, you look at players like Pele Larson, you look at Khalil Ware, you look at Nikola Jovic. There is a lot of potential there, but the ceiling isn't really that high, and nor is the floor on these players. I think that these guys are okay players that could develop into potentially all-star or starting caliber players within the NBA or rotational players on one of these teams, but I just don't think that Miami's deal really matches what Milwaukee is looking for. I mean, a Tyler Hero wouldn't be a cornerstone that would be something that would even entertain Milwaukee. And if you look at Boston's end, sure, we've seen some great talent out of the younger guys on the Boston Celtics, but that's something that Boston shouldn't even be exploring getting rid of, especially where they are at financially and how they are riding the luxury line. You want to keep those young salaries that are on multiple years as long as you can, and possibly find a way of extending those players before they reach their fullest value on the market. One thing that we need to make sure that Boston Celtics aren't expecting, and we've seen a few rumors of it carrying through either smaller social media markets, not through real reporting or anything like that, but the reality of JB, JT, and Giannis being on the same team at the same time, there is no package. It's basically, I would say that package with Derek White would be worse than the Miami package offering Tyler Hero. Because if you're offering Derek White and then you have 3 contracts that are worth over $50 million, and at one point will all be over $60 million on your roster at the same time, you will have to sign the you can't even sign the G League at that point. You're going to be within tax hell, and you're going to be paying for 3 players to be on the court with possibly veteran minimums around them and who knows what else. It's just not a possible reality that could even happen. So I really think that the Celtics will be able to hold on to their younger assets if they are the ones to make a deal with Milwaukee, because the value within Jaylen Brown has peaked right now. It's at its fullest potential. You can get the most for him because right now, as we've mentioned before this, there are 5 teams that are interested in Jaylen Brown becoming their 1A. I mean, you look at Portland, you look at Atlanta, you look at
New Orleans, Houston,
New
and
Orleans,
also
Houston.
maybe Los Angeles with the Clippers, but
Right.
Kawhi's there. However, basically
Yeah.
a younger version of what, to some
But
degree, of what Kawhi is.
But yeah, you look at Celtics history, look at the Isaiah Thomas trade. He was at his peak value, and guess what they turned that into? Kyrie Irving. Sure, that didn't turn out so well, but at that time, you just turned a player that you traded Marcus Thornton for into Kyrie Irving on your team, and that could have potentially, if a alley-oop during game 1 of the season didn't go so poorly and a whole bunch of other factors didn't go so poorly with that era of the Boston Celtics, you could have seen a dynasty built right then and there.
I mean, if Hayward doesn't break his ankle, they might win the title that year. They might win the title the next year. 2020, COVID, who knows? It is a Kyrie what if. And, how many what ifs are there with Kyrie in the past? You could probably pick out thousands, really, if you do it from every single angle. But this feels like a good time to give out these key 6 points as to why right now. See, I said, because I went back in our live last night where we talked about Giannis for 2 hours during that live on Instagram. And, well, actually, we didn't talk about Giannis for 2 hours. We talked about Jaylen Brown for 2 hours. We probably spent, 20, 30 minutes on Giannis as well on that live. But within that live, you mentioned actually, should the Celtics trade for Giannis? And I go, well, for one, I would not look past the rumors. And at that point, only one rumor had come out. Only one. And it was from Shams.
Or Shams.
Well, no. This was before Bill Simmons. This was way before Bill Simmons. This was back in the middle of May. And it was one report by Shams Charania. And it had nothing to do with the Celtics. It had everything to do with, we all knew at this point Milwaukee's going to be shopping Giannis. Giannis is, these destinations. This is basically who offered for Giannis and who could potentially be offering again for Giannis. But Shams Charania reported the Celtics made an offer for Giannis back at the February trade deadline. And that was the first report that came out. And of course, Shams, the most credible reporter in the NBA right now. He's the new age of Woj. And we were talking about, will the Celtics be in on Giannis? You brought up the point, and I went, I don't think we should look past the Celtics going in on Giannis potentially, because it makes sense. It makes sense. At the end of the day, if of a move, even if this gigantic and, to some unfathomable, moving Jaylen Brown, even under those circumstances, if it makes sense, you have to consider it. And again, if Brad didn't consider it and explore the idea and the possibility, he wouldn't be doing his job as GM of the Boston Celtics. But these 6 points, I believe there's 6 of them here. Yeah, there's 6. Here's these 6 points highlight exactly why a potential Giannis trade could make sense for the Celtics. Number 1, the Celtics replace Brown's salary number going ahead into the future with a better player. It's, people out there are going to go, whoa, in Celtic Nation, like, oh, a better player than Jaylen Brown? He just finished top 5 in MVP voting. The reality, folks, is Giannis on his best days, and people could argue he's not been healthy. Now I would chalk that up to the Bucks weren't in contention last year. Why would he play the back half of the season? Yes, he wanted to play, but I just question, the actual motivation. Like Giannis wanted to play, but there was probably a side of him too that went, I'm not really feeling this team right now. But Giannis last year, yeah, the year before, injured. People could point to that. But at the end of the day, Giannis, on his best days, he's a better player than Jaylen Brown. He's an MVP type of player. Jaylen Brown, some could say, yes, he's an MVP type of player. He just finished fifth in MVP voting. It's actually an outlier in MVP voting in NBA history. He's one of the few MVP finalists who had a negative defensive EPM on the season. That's not happened too often in MVP voting history. Yet Jaylen Brown was one of those players. And this is not to thrash Jaylen Brown. It's just to point out that Giannis is a better player than Jaylen Brown. And there's a lot of factors that go into that. We could go all over the court, defensively, offensively, why he's a better player. But that's just the point here, is the Celtics would be replacing Brown's salary number with a better player who makes basically the same amount. And this is another part of why the Celtics, it would make sense to trade for Giannis. Giannis is reportedly willing to sign a 4-year, $275 million extension with the Celtics if he were to be traded to Boston. And that's a huge point. Just for every team, if you're trading for Giannis, you want him to sign that extension. And reportedly, he's willing to sign that extension in Boston, which is why the Celtics ultimately, it goes along with the point of replacing Brown's salary number. You'd be replacing Jaylen Brown with a better player who makes somewhat of the same money from Jaylen Brown, or compared to Jaylen Brown, rather, at the end of the day. To go further, on to the third point, Tatum and Giannis give the Celtics a different look. Right now, the Celtics have a purely outside look, a pure look based on the perimeter. If you think about what Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum do, they are a little bit redundant to each other. No matter whether or not they've won a championship, been on the best team in NBA history together, they are a little bit redundant to each other. If they're on a similar team that's not as efficient as the 24 team, that team could have some cracks. And we saw even in the NBA playoffs this year, the Celtics, they were purely a perimeter-based team. There was nothing going towards the rim. And you could see Brad Stevens was frustrated about that within his end-of-season presser. And that's where I just look at a potential Tatum and Giannis pairing. Tatum, coming off an Achilles injury, he's now going to be even more perimeter-based. If you look at Kevin Durant throughout his career, I think Durant is a very comparable player to Tatum. And ironic because Durant doesn't want to compare any players to anybody, but Durant and Tatum, the way they play the game, very comparable. And Kevin Durant, after his Achilles injury, and even getting older in time, he's in his late 30s now. He'll be 38 next season. Kevin Durant is taking more jump shots. He's taking more shots from beyond the three-point arc. He's driving to the rim less. And that's what I expect from Tatum, too, is with Tatum, I don't see him being as big of as an enforcer as he used to be before that Achilles injury. I think the smart thing to do would be bring his game back to the perimeter, take a couple more jump shots, and play that way. But then that gives the Celtics a door with Giannis to play inside as well and let Giannis be the aggressive driver going towards the rim and let Giannis dominate inside the paint. That would give the Celtics an inside and outside look with Tatum taking jumpers on the perimeter, playmaking on the perimeter, and of course Giannis dominating the rim, playmaking inside the post. That would give the Celtics two different looks that would be tremendously hard to defend and much harder to defend than a look with Brown and Tatum. That's, don't get me wrong, still an elite look for the Celtics when you have two elite playmakers and scorers on the perimeter who can handle the ball next to each other, who are wings who can defend on the other side of the court. But with Giannis and Tatum, it would really diversify what the Celtics can do on offense with two elite players in the lineup. And let's not overlook this too. This would be a legit top 5 MVP player level of pairing. This would be like a Curry and Durant level of pairing. There have been pairings where people go, wow, what a great pairing here. But this would seriously be up there. Like, people look at the Giannis and Dame pairing and go, wow, that's such a great pairing. But, Dame He's usually been hovering around 10th to 15th best player in the league. Tatum, we know his best days, he can be a top 3 player. Giannis, on his best days, he can be a top 1 player in the league. So you can't overlook that within all of this. And again, it would just diversify the Celtics look and take the Celtics from being a primarily perimeter based team to being a team who can actually go on the inside and score on the inside, clean the glass, and get buckets around the rim. Going even further in on this, and we already kind of mentioned this, but Jaylen Brown's at his highest valued point. So this doesn't really, it doesn't add to say why you should trade for Giannis, but it is a point. And if you want to move Jaylen Brown is likely not having another season like the one he just had. And the simple fact of the matter is Jason Tatum's going to be back. Jaylen Brown is probably not going to get as many looks with Jason Tatum back in the lineup. And Jaylen Brown, his value is going to likely decrease. When you're coming off a season where you're a top 5 MVP finisher, teams are looking at you. Clearly, I mean, look how many teams right now are mentioning for Jaylen Brown versus, say you're not really in the mix for anything. Say you're not in the mix for all NBA, and say, it's not guaranteed every player stays healthy. If Jaylen Brown next season, for whatever reason, isn't healthy or doesn't finish all NBA or yada yada, his value is probably not as high at that point. And you're looking at players that are, if you wanted to shop Jaylen Brown because of his deal in the future,
Murray and Trey Murphy.
You're looking at much less talented players than Giannis. And that's part of these factors too, is that the whole timeline adds up. Oh, Giannis, Milwaukee wants to move Giannis, and maybe this is a window where the Celtics go, yeah, we've rostered Jaylen Brown for 10 years, but now might be the point in which we could sell high and really get our full return on Jaylen Brown. And even the Paul Pierce trade, you'd think, wow, the Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett trade turned into Giannis later on in time. But to add a couple more points on here, two more real quick. The Celtics own the draft capital and expendable contracts as well. The draft capital and expendable contracts for the Celtics, there are now more expendable contracts who own legitimate value. Some of the lower guys, Hugo Gonzalez, Jordan Walsh, Baylor Shireman, some of those guys on the back end. You even look at Sam Hauser, he's a tradable deal. If a team really wanted Pritchard at the end of the day, Kada, you even look at him, Derek White too. Jaylen Brown is obviously the big contract in all of this, but you do have some expendable contracts around Jaylen Brown. I feel like I'm forgetting a young player within all of this mix. I feel like I guess I said everybody.
Harper Jr., Sherman,
Harper Jr. you could throw in as well, but regardless, there are plenty of expendable contracts and draft capital now that the Celtics have held on to that they could potentially make a deal with. And this next point too, and the last point goes in with really the point of replacing the Celtics replacing Jaylen Brown and his salary with a better player at the same number going forward. But the Celtics are basically going to be in the same salary spot with Giannis, if not even lower, if the team trades Brown plus another player, say like a Sam Hauser, say Sam Hauser is salary dumped. What's so weird is sometimes I watch Sam Hauser and I go, there's no way they're salary dumping this guy, yet every offseason, every trade deadline, not every trade deadline, not the trade deadline, every offseason, we're like, oh, are they going to salary dump Sam Hauser's $10 million? But when you watch him in the season, he goes 7 of 7 from 3 in a game. You go, there's no way they're salary dumping a guy like this. But in a trade such as this one, maybe Sam Hauser could be out the door to another team. And if that's the case, if the Celtics take back Giannis and they're giving out Brown and Hauser's salary and not taking any other salary back into the mix, you might be at a point where the Celtics could be at a point where they're legitimately, say you add Hauser to a Giannis deal and there's not salary coming back, you could be legitimately $20 million below the luxury tax, which would then give you some space to maneuver, maybe sign an MLE guy, maybe sign a couple minimums, and still not be a tax team, which would be insane for the Celtics because that would net you a fairly good roster, and you'd still not be paying the tax, which would then reset the repeater tax to then pay into the tax the next 3 years when you're no doubt exhausting those 3 years with Giannis and Tatum on the roster going into what will inevitably be the meat and the twilight of their primes. So the Celtics trading for Giannis, there are so many points as to why this makes sense. And there's also a point in it making sense. They're even involved in the rumors of just simply wanting to drive the price of Miami up because F Miami, and we want them to give up more for Giannis if they're actually going to be a threat in the East next year. So you look at all this. This is why you need to pay attention, folks. I think people have gotten the word at this point, but right now we're on code red. We are on code red for Giannis, and this feels like I'm just saying it feels a little like Gordon Hayward in a sense. Now, not what happened afterwards. All right, that is not going to happen. All right, let's manifest. Let's knock on some wood that is not going to happen here. Let's knock on this wood down here. Let's not knock on wood. That's not going to happen. But I'm saying the name, the big name in which the Celtics are pursuing right now. It feels like a Hayward moment where we're going, oh wow, we could really get Hayward. And like Drew Holiday was kind of like that, but I don't think it was quite this magnitude.
And Kyrie. I think that's more comparable than any deal in the past because we really weren't expecting
Kyrie. Yes,
Kyrie deal whatsoever.
I was thinking about that the other night.
I remember I was getting done with a football practice when I was getting home and I saw that Isaiah Thomas was traded for Kyrie Irving. And this is almost an identical situation to that. Jaylen Brown is at his peak value. Isaiah Thomas was even within MVP candidacy during that season, which was absolutely insane.
Top 5, man. He was 5th. This is eerily similar. Eerily similar here.
Come on, it's almost 10 years apart, and I think that it's almost an identical story that we're about to see transpire. However, I think we're going to see some third teams get involved, and that will be something that will be the most interesting because I don't think as Milwaukee is looking to retool their franchise, I think they're looking for that longer down the road, and Jaylen Brown really doesn't add that long-term superstar ability. He is more for a team that is going to be looking to compete within this window. And as we've mentioned before, there's been 5 teams mentioned to have interest within Jaylen Brown's services. The teams that are interested in Jaylen Brown right now are the Atlanta Hawks, Portland Trailblazers, Houston Rockets, New Orleans Pelicans, and the Los Angeles Clippers. That took a few times to get right, but we're going to take it and we're going to use it for editing and all that. And we can keep this whole part in. Getting all these teams down, man, it's really just showing the variety of teams because in that mix, it's usually when you're going into those tiers, you have a very wide spread mix of people. I mean, Houston and Los Angeles are 2 teams that I believe are going to be well over the tax apron. And then you have the Pelicans and Blazers, who are 2 teams that are on the opposite side of the totem pole and are really just looking for anything to put on a billboard for their franchise and something that their fans can be satisfied with. And the team that I would be most intrigued in are the Atlanta Hawks, Jaylen Brown's hometown, and a team that he has been linked to throughout his entire career. I think there's been a few snippets, if we went back in time, of him mentioning Atlanta, how he would love to play for Atlanta, or subtly bringing up the possibility of playing for the Hawks would be great for his career. And if Boston really wants to appease Jaylen Brown, and as Jaylen Brown is a player that has done great things for the Boston Celtics community and also is someone that the Boston Celtics value greatly for his services, bringing us an NBA championship and also building up his own resume throughout the season while playing without Jason Tatum in the roster. Sending him to Atlanta almost seems like the most valuable or right option out of the 5 teams, and probably the most feasible option as well for assets, because if we go through the other teams, a lot of their assets are a lot younger, and I don't really see any assets coming from Milwaukee, or not Milwaukee, New Orleans, or even Portland, that matches the value of Jaylen Brown or Giannis Antetokounmpo, other than draft picks. And that could be valuable to the Milwaukee Bucks, but I think that they're really looking for future assets, and we could go through each team's reasons why they would be interested and why it doesn't make sense or why it does.
Well, I think the primary theme of every team interested in Jaylen Brown, they don't have a reliable 1A superstar in the middle of their prime. You go down the list, the Hawks, you have Jalen Johnson, but is he your 1A superstar? That's really not been answered yet. And so far, you could say he's been great statistically, but you really haven't seen that level of stardom late in games in the fourth quarter. Him just taking over a game, dominating a game, playmaking for others. He's just kind of in the mix. And that's where there remains a question on him of whether or not he can be a 1A or 1B or a 2, right? With Jalen Johnson. So the Hawks don't necessarily have a 1A guy. The Blazers certainly don't right now. A lot of young talent, but there's no 1A superstar
A lot of
in
old
Portland. That's really the one thing they're missing. And I think that would be one of the more fun destinations for Jaylen Brown to actually land if he were to be traded away from the Celtics. Portland, if he lands in Portland, all of a sudden they become a conversation starter out west of who are the top teams out west. Could Portland slide up into that mix? The Rockets, Kevin Durant's 38. You'd say he's their 1A superstar, but guys behind him, say Amin Thompson, say Tari Eason. I shouldn't say Tari Eason. Tari Eason's definitely a role player, but Amin Thompson, Alperen Şengün, Jabari Smith. That's who I was thinking of
Reed
when I said
Shepherd.
Tari Eason. Even Reed Shepherd. All these guys are young, but they have not necessarily proven to be the guys yet. And maybe, again, Şengün develops even further. Jabari Smith, Reed Shepherd, like you mentioned, even Amin Thompson. They could develop further in their career, but there are some kinks in their games that you could point to and go, every one of these players, you question of whether or not they're actually going to get to that status of 1A superstar. And when I say 1A superstar, that's your top guy. That's a top 10 player in the NBA. That's a legitimate superstar on your roster who can carry you during some games and win you multiple games during the regular season. The Rockets, again, they're dealing with an older player in Durant. We'll see what they do with him this summer. It's likely they ride it out with him, I would say, at his age and his
I mean, who's
contractual
going to trade
value.
for Durant right now?
But the Clippers are kind of in the same position of the Rockets, where they're not in the same position from a young guy standpoint, but where their superstars at. Kawhi Leonard, a little bit older now, and you'd say the Clippers, they're always in on every single superstar who ever becomes available to them ever. Let's just face it. Literally every star who's become available, it's like, oh, can we pair them next to Paul George and Kawhi Leonard? And sometimes they do, and it turns into a James Harden situation or Russell Westbrook situation. And other times they're trading away James Harden for Darius Garland, and we don't really know where the Clippers are going. And then the Pelicans are obvious. Zion Williamson's supposed to be their superstar, but there's really no results behind his stardom in the league, even though people see him as a star. But the Pelicans, they're looking at it going, if we get our true 1A guy, maybe Zion's number 2, they could be a team that's certainly interested in Jaylen Brown. So all those teams, the theme around those teams, they don't have their top guy. And yes, you could argue, yes, Durant, Kawhi, Zion, but it's just Zion is, again, not quite there. Durant's older, Kawhi's older. Jaylen Brown is in the meat of his prime, producing at a top 5 MVP level from what we last saw of him last season on his own team. That's why these other teams are going to be interested in Jaylen as well, is they saw last season this is what he looks like with his own team. We know everything beforehand now, or at least they're thinking what we saw from Jaylen Brown beforehand. That's a product of playing alongside Jason Tatum, and imagine what he would look like on his own team. And that's why all these teams are ultimately interested in Jaylen Brown. But this is this situation, looking at the entirety of the situation, it makes sense as to why the Celtics would trade for Giannis. It makes sense as to why the Celtics would offload Jaylen Brown at this point in his career and even the Celtics timeline. It makes sense as to why other teams would be interested in Jaylen Brown right now and actually throwing out real value from their rosters, their draft arsenal to go get a Jaylen Brown or even facilitate, of course, a Giannis trade within this scenario for the Celtics. And all of the reporting so far, just to give this stat out. So since the beginning of the offseason, this is I'm going to go down and give the number of reports that have come out in regard to either Jaylen Brown's involvement with other teams. I shouldn't say Jaylen Brown's involvement with other teams, but other teams' interest in Jaylen Brown, and all the reports about the Celtics' involvement in the Giannis sweepstakes. So far, we've had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 different reports. And that's not even counting the report of, I mentioned earlier, Brett Siegel, rival front offices preparing for the Celtics to make a big change this offseason at the beginning of the offseason. And that's also not factoring in the odds markets tilting towards the Celtics potentially trading for Giannis and being Giannis's next home. 11 different reports. That's just reporters and people with information just unloading their clips. And when that happens, you got to pay attention. But Franco, I do want to go back on a point you mentioned earlier too. The Kyrie trade. I think you were completely spot on in this whole timeline leading up to this moment where the Celtics could be days away from trading for Giannis. Does feel like the whole Kyrie saga where Kyrie transitioned from the Cavs to the Celtics and the trade eventually happened, but there was a whole saga before that. The only thing that's different though is the day in which Kyrie was traded. That was a legitimate whoa now. The Celtics were involved in this? What's going on? The Celtics trade for Giannis, we'll have known a little bit ahead of time, like, all right, the Celtics are definitely ramping up into this potential deal. Kyrie, we didn't quite know that. But what's completely similar about these two moments, Kyrie at the beginning of it, when Kyrie requested trade from Cleveland, Celtic Nation looked at it and went, all right, where's Kyrie going? We're watching the dismantlement of the Cleveland Cavaliers right now. Here we go. You could say the same thing about Giannis and the Bucks. Like, all right, when are the Bucks going to trade Giannis? Where is he going? All right, the Bucks are done. And they've been finished for a while, but the Bucks are done. Here we go. And then, there's some speculation out there like, yeah, what if, back then it was like, what if the Celtics were to ever trade for Kyrie? It's like, oh, yeah, what if the Celtics today, ever were to trade for Giannis? And it's just like, all right, crazy thought, right? But, it may be out there.
Single graphic was a terrible 2016 photo swap. Now you can just put it into an AI generator like that. And
back then people were doing real art and that was real stuff. Like, I mean, shout out Titletown Apparel, gotta say. And I think it was D-Roy Chris. It's the OGs. But what also within this Giannis saga feels similar in the sense of, and again, like the Celtics have not traded for Giannis yet. So I can't say this is quite similar, but just in terms of the reality of the Celtics' involvement in both players, Kyrie and Giannis, when it was discovered, the Kyrie, within the Kyrie situation, the Celtics were going to trade for Kyrie. It was like, whoa. So we were all waiting for, where is Kyrie going to go? And I say we, Celtic Nation. It was Celtic Nation. That's what this Giannis situation kind of feels like right now, where we're going, where's Giannis going? Where's Giannis? Oh, Golden State, oh, Miami, and then bam! He might actually wind up with the Celtics, and we have people, legitimately credible people, telling us on podcasts they think Giannis is going to be a Celtic by this time next week. And again, it's not official. And these people, again, grain of salt, it's not done. Nobody's reporting that, oh, this is done. But you have people giving opinions out from the intel in which they're receiving that state the Celtics are real players in this deal, in these sweepstakes. And from all of our speculation of what could be offered and what makes sense for the Celtics and even other teams involved, this all feels as if it's heading in a particular direction. And it might end a little different than we think. But right now, this is why we're on code red. We're on code red. Like any day now, we got to be prepared to go live at
Yes.
all times. Like
And I think it's really
clean shave, button up at all, like button up in the, like Superman. Like, whew,
yep.
I see it.
Clark,
No,
Clark,
that's Batman. Batman has the bat signal.
Clark
Rip
Kent
it
has
off. Let's go.
the telephone booth,
Yes.
the payphone.
Yeah.
But
do they have those anymore anywhere?
I think London,
London,
like that. But
London.
I think the only thing we're waiting on right now is really that who. And out of those 5 locations that we were able to list earlier, who do you think is the most touted for Jaylen Brown services heading into next season?
If I'm going to be completely honest, I think it's Portland. Because, real quick, there's all kinks in these other teams potentially trading for Jaylen Brown. The Rockets. What's happening with Durant? You're just going to pair up Durant and Jaylen Brown and give up a young guy potentially in this scenario and just make your team super old when 2 seasons ago you were looked at as one of the better young teams with all these assets. Like I feel like the Rockets, there's just a Durant problem there. There just is. The Hawks, there's a Jalen Johnson problem because I think within, and we'll get into this in a minute, but if you make some mock trades, is Jalen Johnson involved? Do the Hawks want to pair up Jalen Johnson and Jaylen Brown? Or do they want to potentially trade away Jalen Johnson for Jaylen Brown? Either scenario, Jaylen Brown becomes extremely expensive for the Hawks with Jalen Johnson at the top. So you have those 2 guys. That's going to be an expensive pairing, at least with Brown at the top. And how do you fill out your roster behind them and what does their identity really look like? That just kind of feels like a worse Brown and Tatum to some degree. Like if you really think about it, Jalen Johnson and Jaylen Brown, although part of this equation is Jalen Johnson could be a great number 2. He could be even your number 1 if you're the Hawks, but he only makes $30 million. And if you're trading him away for Jaylen Brown is older than Jalen Johnson. I would really bet on Jalen Johnson's continued progression and his great contract moving into the future. You could have another $40 million player on top of Jalen Johnson for the same price as you could just have Jaylen Brown singularly if the Hawks, of course, play their cards right going into the future. So there's a little bit of a kink there where you're going, Jalen Johnson, Jaylen Brown, does that pairing even make sense? And on top of that, if you trade Jalen Johnson away, does that make sense either for Jaylen Brown? Like it feels like it moves Atlanta's timeline way up and gives them less resources to actually make moves going into the future. With the Pelicans, they just have a bunch of randomness, and I think they would be the second team that I would say like could definitely make a Jaylen Brown move because it's just like the Pelicans just I don't feel like they have really an identity or plan in all of this, and it's just like, all right, let's try to get a top 5 MVP finisher. Maybe it works out. The Clippers, the Kawhi pairing, does that really totally make sense? And some of the assets that would be coming out from the Clippers, I don't know if the Clippers would be willing to give up very much in this scenario. And the Clippers, if you think about some of the moves they've made, they shouldn't have too much to give up within this scenario. And that's why I look at the Blazers, going back on them. If we look at where the Blazers are right now, which going to their salary sheet real quick, a lot of tradable deals. Okay, so you have Drew Holiday at $34.8 million, Jeremy Grant $34.2 million. You have Shaden Sharp $20 million. He's going to be a young guy that could either be a salary filler or a nice guy who ultimately develops with another team if Portland wants to actually deal him somewhere. 18 million, 18.1 million for Tony Camara, which that extension is a little questionable to me, but there are teams out there still like Commerce Service, and that contract right now does begin next year. So there's quite a few years on that, 4 years starting next year. You have Scoot Henderson, $13.6 million next year if they pick that up. Damian Lillard, I doubt they trade him away, but 13.4, he's definitely a salary filler at the very least. It's insane. 14.3 million for Damian Lillard last year, and he didn't even play. Well, see, that's where Portland, like, this is actually Damian Lillard. Like, we're just throwing him out in terms of like, oh, Damian Lillard, is he going to be involved? Oh, they probably won't trade him. But he actually displays one of the more important points as to why Portland would be involved with Jaylen Brown is why would you give $14.3 million to Damian Lillard, who's not going to play? That's what an incompetent franchise does. And to me, I was yelling out last year, like, oh, if he signs anywhere, it's going to be for the minimum, or he's going to give a verbal agreement, or he's going to sit out the whole season. No, Portland gives him a 3-year deal, and that's why you got to consider Portland. And you throw in other teams, like I just mentioned, New Orleans, Sacramento. Where's Sacramento in this? I'm surprised Sacramento hasn't come down from the rafters and gone, oh, we'll throw our end in for Jaylen Brown over here because we don't know what we're really doing and we're rebuilding,
What are
but
they
we don't
gonna
really
send
know.
Zach LaVine and Sabonis to Milwaukee? They don't want that.
Well, I'm just saying for Jaylen Brown, like maybe, again, we discussed like, okay, if the Celtics are trading Jaylen Brown, it's going to be for Giannis over anyone else. But say there was another Jaylen Brown deal out there. It's like, could there be a Sabonis Jaylen Brown deal? I don't know. Celtics fans wouldn't be great. They wouldn't be
I
grateful over
wouldn't be
that move.
super
They would not be happy over that move, but it's a possibility. Avdia, 13.1 million, just to continue these contracts here for the Blazers. Klingon, 7.5. Chris Murray, 5.3. Young Hansen, 4.6. Vic Krejci, 2.6, or 2.7 rather. And City Cisco, 2.5. Krejci and Sissoko aren't going to matter in this entire equation, but looking at everybody else, Shaden Sharp, probably pretty expendable. Kamara, probably pretty expendable. Scoot Henderson, I would say he's somewhat expendable. He's a tradable contract. Plus, other teams are definitely looking at Scoot going, well, if he could come within our development system, if he could join our program here, we might turn him into the player Portland couldn't. Avdia, he played up to a star standard last year, an all-star standard last year. Definitely owns a lot of value with a descending deal over the next 2 years. Just an insane. He's like the Pritchard contract for the Blazers. But again, the Blazers got to look at them and go, are they gonna potentially shop that? Drew Holiday and Jeremy Grant as well, both making beyond 34 million into their 30s. They're definitely expendable at the top. So a lot of expendable players for the Blazers here, and all their young guys. Like if you really look at the core of their young guys, Shaden Sharp, Scoot Henderson. You throw in Chris Murray, maybe no, he's 25. You throw who are their top 3 young guys? See, that's the question for Portland. That is the prime question of okay, who are your franchise pillars? So, some of the youngest players on the roster, Shaden Sharp, you have Scoot Henderson, Klingon. Those are your top 3, like what you feel most
that's
good about.
Stones.
And it feels like it's like these guys could be role players. Like Shaden Sharp might be like a 4th best player on a team. Scoot Henderson might just be a good starting guard. Klingon might be just a great starting center, like a Zubac. Like he might not go beyond that for the Blazers, and that's where you got to question if you're Portland, like where are our real faces here? Where are our real future star faces? Drew Holiday, he's in his late 30s. Jeremy Grant is not a 1A superstar by any means whatsoever. And what I'll add on to this point too, and Avdia, I love Avdia, but he's another name where great contract, but where does the future lie with Avdia and where he sits, and even an Avdia Jaylen Brown mix? Does that even really make any sense for the Blazers? If they were to pair him, he could be out the door in a potential trade deal and selling high on him and his descending contract. But the Blazers right now, they have the most expendable contracts within this mix, and they have a lot of reason as to why they would do a deal. They just don't have that 1A superstar, like I mentioned earlier, with all these different teams, specifically the Blazers. They have a lot of nice pieces, but they really need that singular franchise pillar that lifts all these pieces into the air. And to go on with that point, Portland has, all as most people know within the basketball community, a new owner just took over the Portland Trailblazers. And typically, when a new owner takes over a franchise, wants to drive the car around a little bit. From a new owner perspective, the Blazers could be looking to just make a move for a guy to solidify a star face in Portland that the Portland Trailblazers can market. New owners like to make big splashes, and why not Jaylen Brown in this instance? And not only, let's face it, the Trailblazers made a couple deals with the Celtics in the last couple of years.
Likewise with the
Drew
Bucks.
Holiday, Anthony Simons. So that's how I look at it.
That's been a trifecta in the past that have gotten a few deals done. If there even wants to be a fourth team, you could get New Orleans involved, and then those four have all danced together in the past as well. But, I mean, looking at the options and looking at Portland, I see them standing more put than a lot of the other teams, and obviously with new ownership. But looking at that young core, there is just so many question marks over there. We both agree upon that point, but we take contrary perspectives on it. I see Portland as a team that needs to get a little bit of an identity created before they move forward. And right now, with the pure talent that they have on that roster through, obviously, Jeremy Grant, players like Damian Lillard, and then players like Shaedon Sharpe, Denny Advia, Klingon, Hansen Yang, who we really haven't even seen yet, and was kind of a reach of a draft pick, and also Scoot Henderson. A lot of these guys really don't even have a set value yet. So I don't see Milwaukee really having too much interest in that, and really looking at the salary dumper players that Portland has to offer. I don't think they would be interested in a player like Jeremy Grant or Drew Holiday unless a fourth team wanted to get involved and eat that contract or absorb the player for Milwaukee. But I think with the component of the 1A superstar and a team that just needs to find that identity within one player, I think the team that really needs it the most is Atlanta. And we'll start to switch over to the next segment and really break into what type of deal could happen. But looking at Atlanta, I think that bringing in a player like Jaylen Brown after trading away Trae Young during this trade deadline really changed their team, and honestly kind of showed more of a structure behind the team. They really conformed into a unity, leading them all the way into the playoffs and into the play-in. So I think that that's a team that could really utilize a player like Jaylen Brown, and Jaylen Brown has already, as I said earlier, has really vocalized his support for the Atlanta community, his roots to the community, and has always had inclinations to be interested in someday being a Hawk. And looking at the deals that could be offered, a player that is up for debate within the deals with Atlanta, the core players that you're going to hear are Risa Shea, Jalen Johnson, Jonathan Kuminga, and Dyson Daniels, and possibly Nikhil Alexander Walker, but I don't see them really moving off of those players. But those are going to be the guys that would most likely be revolved in this deal. And if we would like to get into one of our first mock trades for Evergreen Sports mock trades, we can pull that up as we speak. So if you want to join us on Forever Green Sports at Forever Green Sports on Instagram. We will have this posted for you with a more in-depth graphic and also including more information on this trade so you can get a closer up view. But listed in this trade right here, we have Giannis Antetokounmpo, Buddy Hield, and the Atlanta Hawks second round pick, which is pick number 57, which is the original Boston Celtics pick, coming to Boston for Milwaukee. Milwaukee will be receiving Jaylen Johnson, Zachary Risache, Sam Hauser, a 2026 first round pick, which will be pick number 8 from their deal with actually Atlanta to move up in this year's deal. And I believe that was involved in the Asa Newell trade, or yes, I believe so. That was the Asa Newell trade. And then they will also be receiving Atlanta's original pick, which is number 23, alongside a pick swap that was relayed in a past deal from Atlanta. And then they will be receiving rights to swap the 2031 first round pick with the Boston Celtics and receiving a second round pick that was transferred to Boston from the Houston Rockets. And the Atlanta Hawks will be receiving Jaylen Brown, Andre Jackson Jr., and 2026 first round pick from the Boston Celtics, which is pick number 27. So a few of these players in this deal are a few guys that are more of salary fillers and were necessary for this deal to be made. Buddy Hield for Sam Hauser is the obvious dead salary swap, which are two players that could be deemed as valuable on a rotation, in a playoff rotation. Obviously, Sam Hauser having some great value. I think if you look towards a team like a Buddy Hield, which is a cheaper deal than what Sam Hauser is on at $9.6 million and is also on a trade player exception, this is actually Boston saving money moving forward in the future and also gaining assets to move forward, and are also not taking on more salary as they are moving their first round pick for a second round pick. So they're still getting 2 draft picks in this year's class, but they're both going to be on day 2, which is much cheaper and also doesn't hit against the salary, as day 2 picks are not required to have a can sign a 2-way salary rather than being on a standard deal.
The first thing that comes to my mind when trying to configure a 3-team deal between the Hawks, the Celtics, and the Bucks for Giannis and Jaylen Brown, I look at what the Celtics are giving up within Jaylen Brown, and I go, how many picks along with Jaylen Brown do the Celtics need to add within a potential deal for Giannis if they're giving up Jaylen Brown as well? And then on if you go over to Atlanta's side within this deal, I question Atlanta and I go, what is that Atlanta really willing to give up from a young asset perspective? Say a Dyson Daniels, say an 8th overall pick, maybe even Jaylen Johnson is involved. Say those 3 assets in particular, and even you go further down into their asset arsenal. What is Atlanta really willing to give up for Jaylen Brown? Because say you give up a Dyson Daniels and an 8th overall pick, does that start to become a little bit too much for Atlanta, giving away too much of a young future for what is right now next to a young player in Jaylen Johnson? And then earlier, I mentioned the whole Jaylen Johnson thing of, if they're giving up Jaylen Johnson, is that less efficient than just keeping him on the roster? Maybe he is a second banana. Maybe he's even your first banana on the roster, making $30 million, and you could add another max player on top of Jaylen Johnson that would really excel and maximize the team in the future, versus Jaylen Brown. You might only have Jaylen Brown going into now his early 30s. So I question for Atlanta if the asset pool within that the young assets in particular, what are they really willing to give up for Jaylen Brown? And does it get to a point where they're just giving away too many young assets to really consider this? And then on the Celtics side of things, I go, you know, if you're giving up Jaylen Brown for Giannis, how much more do you have to give up player wise or even pick wise to get a deal done? And then from Milwaukee's standpoint, there's only one consideration that I have for Milwaukee is you're just trying to extract the most you could possibly extract out of both Boston and Atlanta within a potential scenario like this, or even another third team or another team out there because you're trading Giannis as a small market team. Giannis is a top 3 player in the NBA, and Milwaukee, they're a bottom 10 market in the NBA. And so if you're trading such an impactful face as Giannis away from the franchise, as Milwaukee's going to do this summer, you need to net the best return possible. And the best return we've ever seen on trading away and I don't even want to say he was he was a franchise face, no doubt, but he wasn't necessarily a generational superstar. It was the Oklahoma City trading away Paul George. You want that level of package really out of any player. Now that was unprecedented circumstances, but that's an example of how a team can trade away a star face, say like the Oklahoma City Thunder did with Paul George, and they parlayed that into Shea Gilgeous-Alexander. They picked Jalen Williams with one of those picks. You can go on and on. They used those picks for good, and they built a championship team in 2025, 6 years after the deal. The Milwaukee Bucks want to be able to say the same thing when it comes to the Giannis deal. They want to look 6 years down the line and go, we're now competitive again without Giannis, but this Giannis deal initially back in 2026, that is what ultimately sparked this comeback for the Milwaukee Bucks. The downfall of Milwaukee with Giannis became the trend upwards for the Bucks with another group of talented players. That's what the Bucks want to get out of these deals, or this one Giannis deal to be exact on that. But as for the Celtics, it's like, are you giving up too much? If you're just, kind of moving one way or the other, and the Hawks, it's like, are you really willing to sacrifice part of your future for Jaylen Brown, who's going to be 30?
Orlando Magic, Desmond Bain. I mean, look with Jimmy Butler. The trade market right now is absolutely skewed, and it's even accredited to Milwaukee for the ludicrous trade package that they sent out for Damian Lillard just a few years ago. They're still trying to revive or reassemble some of the picks that were expelled within that trade, and within this trade you'd be doing so. Even if you wanted to include Portland as a fourth team, then Milwaukee could really dive into being like, all right, it sucks that they would have to do this, but they would be like, all right, our goal when we trade Giannis is to get all of the picks that we have sent out in our past back on our roster. That really could be Milwaukee's goal in this trade, is to try to clean up the mess that they made in the past while distributing Giannis and trying to recapitalize on their draft capital that they expelled for really a run that only fell short for a second championship run. And I mean, I see that happening for Milwaukee, and with this deal getting, what would they be receiving? They would be receiving 4 first-round picks alongside the second-round pick. I'm sure that more picks can be included in this deal, but 2 of the biggest values within this deal, in my opinion, is that the 2026 picks are this year, which would kind of lessen the draft pick value. And instead of giving away 6 future picks, maybe Atlanta sending 2 picks that are happening this year and that you already know the set value of them being 8 and 23, while Atlanta receives our 27 pick to still have a first round pick this year. I think that really evens out this deal, because Milwaukee, within the trade that I proposed, would be able to receive 5 players that will be on the court next season for the Milwaukee Bucks, which would be Jalen Johnson, Zachary Risacher, Sam Hauser, whether they would decide to keep him or move him in the past or later on down the road. And then the number 8 pick, they own the number 10 pick, and then they would have the number 23 pick. So that is one hell of a short-term return as well as a long-term return to build off after trading away your franchise player, which was Giannis Antetokounmpo.
What's interesting about this deal is the balance of where each asset is coming from. But the Bucks, if this deal were to happen, I think the Bucks are certainly looking at Jaylen Johnson, Reese Sachet. You could throw in Hauser. Sure, why not? With all these
Wisconsin
picks, and
boys.
they'd be eyeing it. They'd be eyeing it. Like, this is a trade you'd have to consider if you're Milwaukee. It's a haul, like you mentioned. The only thing I question is, say Atlanta, if they're say the Celtics are giving up Giannis, they're giving up Jaylen Brown, their first round pick this year, a first round pick later in the future, as well as a second round pick, right? So they're giving up Brown, Hauser, 2 firsts, and a second, right? Versus Atlanta, they're getting Jaylen Brown and the Celtics first, but they're giving up Jalen Johnson, Reese Sachet, 2 picks this year, and a pick in 2027, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Well, pick swap.
Pick swap.
These are
I,
all
I just go like, okay, Atlanta's giving up Jalen Johnson, Reese Sachet, and 3 firsts for Jaylen Brown, but we're giving up Jaylen Brown, Hauser, 2 firsts, and a second for Giannis. I just wonder, like, maybe Atlanta gives up 1 less first round pick in this scenario.
right.
And bought, but see, that's where the conversation flips is, say Atlanta might be giving up, 1 more pick than they'd want to in this scenario. But I even think, like, Jalen Johnson, they probably look at it like, Jalen Johnson, why are we giving up so many picks if we're trading away Jalen Johnson? I'll say that for Jaylen Brown. Atlanta could look at it that way too. But say if they were to give up 1 less pick or even 2, does that shift the pendulum from Milwaukee over now to, all right, Boston, we want more pick compensation from you, but then now Boston looks at it and goes, well, we're already giving up Jaylen Brown. Why are we giving up another first round pick and another first round pick when, people could mention within the Giannis and Jaylen Brown conversation, the Celtics could be making a lateral move going from Jaylen Brown to Giannis. You could come up with the same result. You could be knocked out in the first round next year. You might not have enough depth. You might not have enough talent around Giannis or Tatum. And you also might, let's face it, Tatum just tore his Achilles a year and a half ago. And, well, now a year ago, I should say, not quite a half yet, but by the time next season starts, it'll be a year and a half. And Giannis, he's been injury prone the last couple of seasons. You could go, oh, well, are they even going to be on the court together that often? Like, you could definitely point to the history behind, certain guys Giannis's size going into their mid 30s and not come up with great results. And there's an argument that the Celtics could just be moving laterally, going from Jaylen Brown to Giannis. And that's where the Celtics, if they're going to consider that point, are they going to look at the picks they're giving up and going, why are we giving up so many firsts if we think we're going, we're getting better, but how much better? 3 first round picks better, 2 first round picks better? Like, that's where my mind goes with specifically a mock trade such as this one.
And also to include on this mock trade, one thing that is to be noticed within this deal is notice the lack of lottery protected picks. I doubt that's going to be a expected thing in these future deals, especially regarding larger weighted players. I think that, or larger scaled players, I think that it's going to be a lot more of pick rights being swapped, teams receiving the worst out of the 3 or 4 teams that are already accredited to have rights to the pick. So I think that's just going to become more complicated over time. So with the new even lottery, I think that we're going to see a lot more of these teams looking for just pick swaps instead of protections on draft picks.
Yeah, it's hard to say what kind of effect that picks could have. And, well, not picks primarily, but the new draft system could have on picks going into the future, because really looking at it, we know from the second apron, we know from that teams at the beginning, they look at the second apron, they go, okay, this is a thing, but it's not necessarily acted upon until the ramifications start hitting teams in the gut. And it's going to be the same when it comes to these draft picks, where teams don't necessarily act upon the new draft system immediately. Some will understand the pattern in which nets the most value over time, but the league is a competitive playing field. And at the end of the day, some teams are going to figure out more efficient methods of making transactions, specifically with draft picks behind the scenes, than others. It reminds me of the kickoff in the NFL. The NFL changed the kickoff in 2025, and some teams developed a method of gaining the most efficiency in preventing yards returned from their opponents versus other teams who just kept kicking off in the same way and acted like nothing had changed. It's going to be the same with draft picks. Some teams are going to go, oh, nothing's really changed. And even part of this conversation, I believe, we don't really understand what's going to change and how the perception of picks are going to change, because even us right now, we're talking about picks as if they're still somewhat normal. Like this is just going to be like picks are going to be treated in the same way. But as time moves on, picks and teams will treat picks differently. And we'll start to see that. And it could even start this summer a little bit. But I bet going into the future, it's going to be seen more and more as the drafts actually come about, and not this next draft, because this next draft, 2026 here, not affected by the rules at all, but 2027, 2028, those are actually the only two draft periods in which the NBA is going to try this new draft system, draft lottery out. And once we see the results, particularly next year, that's when next offseason will be a little rearranged from teams valuing draft picks a little bit differently from what they had been valued at in the past. Right now, I believe teams are valuing draft picks at somewhat the same rate, considering we haven't seen any of the changes. The changes will come in May next year when the lottery actually happens and when the season happens as well. It'll be during the season we'll see the change of, oh, there aren't as many teams, trying to get to the bottom, because if you get to the bottom, nothing good is waiting for you there anymore within the lottery system. So we'll see that during the season, but even in the lottery next year, that'll make teams react, knowing where teams actually start falling in and how teams start playing. As for now, this offseason, we can't necessarily totally forecast that, nor can teams, and that's why teams, in terms of how draft picks are evaluated, it'll stay somewhat of the same until, again, a team is eventually punched in the gut, and then people will see that and go, oh, we don't want to be punched ourselves.
Right.
Let's rearrange our strategy on how we could make it around this guy. So at the end of this, being from Celtic Nation, because I look at Celtic Nation as almost like a place, more like a group. It's really a group of people, but almost like a place, like a country.
No, it's no bounds.
Right. There's no boundaries, but it is, kind of like this. Oh, also Saudi Arabia and Uruguay just tied 1-1. So congrats to, I guess, both teams. We don't really do that in America. We don't really tie. That we usually congratulate or thrash one side or the other. But we're getting used to soccer around here. The World Cup. I'm so excited. But anyway, at the end of this, in Celtic Nation, right? Hailing from Celtic Nation, should the Celtics trade Jaylen Brown for Giannis Antetokounmpo? Yes or no?
The Boston Celtics should only trade Jaylen Brown for Giannis Antetokounmpo. There are no other packages out there unless there is, you name a top 5 player, you would have to be naming players like Jokic being out on the market. Ludicrous players that teams would be reluctant and would never want to move on.
Like a Giannis.
Yeah.
Like a Giannis.
Yes.
No team would want to trade Giannis unless they're in the position of the Milwaukee Bucks right now.
Right. And if you're the Boston Celtics, you have to cash in on that. But any other offers from the New Orleans Pelicans offering DeJounte Murray, Trey Murphy, or if you're getting a call from the LA Clippers offering you Derek Jones Jr., Benedict Mathurin, and Bogdanovich.
And the
No.
fifth pick,
And the fifth.
Darius Acuff.
I mean, what would
He
the
might be a legend. That
Boston
might sound
Celtics?
funny one day.
Yeah, the Boston Celtics show absolutely no value towards a high value draft pick. I mean, what would if the Celtics were to trade Jaylen Brown for a lottery pick this year or even a top 10 pick this year? That really just doesn't make any
How does that
sense
maximize your window with Tatum?
or trajectory for what
Doesn't.
they're trying to capitalize. It would be a complete setback, and it would put this team back literally a decade since you've drafted Jaylen Brown if you were to move on from him for draft capital. And that should only be the case and only be the case if Giannis does not end up being a Boston Celtic and Giannis ends up being sent to Miami for a driven up stock value. You keep Jaylen Brown throughout next season. Hopefully, this doesn't trigger any weird feelings, weird emotions heading into the season, add any commotion, because we've seen that happen within Boston when these trade rumors start to come around and names in Boston start to float around. Players usually feel like that's their way out the door, and that really shouldn't be the case for Jaylen Brown if this Giannis situation doesn't follow through. Jaylen Brown is still the second best player and still is very capable of continuing to build on the Boston Celtics legacy. And however, if you go into next year and you end up being eliminated again, this will be the last season that you see Derek White, Jaylen Brown, and Jason Tatum being the three highest paid players on the Boston Celtics. Because after that, the window has ran its course. And unfortunately, if you get to next season and Jaylen Brown's still on the roster and things don't go right, that's when you have to start considering those trades from the Pelicans, the Rockets, and the Clippers, and really be looking to work in more of a financial way and distributing the money to retool around Jason Tatum again, which is the worst case scenario that Boston wants to be in. But if this asking price for the Milwaukee Bucks or whatever third team we end up working with doesn't require any assets that are beyond a very future pick swap, or if a team is asking for more than 2 first-round draft picks and Jaylen Brown for Giannis, that's a really hard bargain, and it might be something that the Boston Celtics would be more comfortable walking away from than being screwed into a deal that they would regret later.
At the end of the day, it's all about what type of pick and player compensation is heading out the door. Because Jaylen Brown for Giannis straight up, in my mind, makes a lot of sense. Like I went into earlier in depth, and I believe that would be an upgrade for the Celtics. I would be excited for it, replacing Jaylen Brown for Giannis. And that's not saying anything bad personally about Jaylen Brown. From a basketball perspective, I am saying the Boston Celtics would be better as a basketball team with Giannis on the court in replacement of Jaylen Brown
would say
next
the same
to Jason Tatum.
Jaylen Brown would.
And maybe I don't. Players are ultra confident, so you never know. But again, I said it earlier. Giannis gives you that inside outside look, whereas Brown and Tatum, they just give you that outside look. And Brad Stevens in his presser did mention that outside look maybe could be changing stylistically next year. And Giannis gives the Celtics the perfect opportunity to do that while selling high on Jaylen Brown, who you may never be able to extract this much value out of ever into the future. A Giannis? Are you serious? He's a top 3 player in the NBA when healthy, and he's not a Joel Embiid when healthy. He's mostly been healthy. There have been some flare ups here and there, but if you really look at it, it's like Giannis has mostly been out on the court. Some important moments he's missed, sure. But all leads back to this pick and player compensation. If Jaylen Brown's in the deal, is Sam Hauser in the deal as well? Are 3 first round picks in the deal? Are 4 first round picks? Like, that's what's going to matter. Is Ugo Gonzalez, Baylor Shireman, Jordan Walsh, Ron Harper Jr., are they in the deal? Is Kata in the deal? Like, depending on what the deal actually looks like, there could be a asking price from there could be an asking price from the Milwaukee Bucks that goes way beyond what the Celtics should do. And in that scenario, I go, yeah, the Celtics should just hold on to their assets and make something else happen this summer. And maybe it's not a Giannis deal. Maybe it's something with Derek White. Who knows? Maybe that comes down from the Raptors. And I don't think enough people are really talking about that at this point in time. I think that could definitely happen this summer, especially with Kevin O'Connor's report of the Celtics shopping around every player outside of Jason Tatum everywhere. So we saw that come out. And that's why we must consider that as well. But the Celtics, if it's just Jaylen Brown for Giannis straight up and there's not much pick compensation, you definitely have to consider pulling the trigger, because at the at the looking at history, the Celtics are going to adhere to the primal nature of the NBA, and really the bottom line core of the NBA being a business. And in business, it's all cutthroat. There's no, like, even loyalty to some degree. There's only loyalty to a certain point. There's loyalty to value within a competitive playing field. If there's no value, there's no loyalty. And right now, the Celtics, there's a chance they could take the value of Jaylen Brown as a basketball player and as a contract and optimize that and maximize that. And that says nothing about the personality of Jaylen Brown, or even, the player that Jaylen Brown is on court. That says nothing to the point of, oh, the Celtics should trade Jaylen Brown. That's not what anybody's saying. It's, should the Celtics upgrade from Jaylen Brown? And there's a whole different side of this that states Jaylen Brown is a cultural icon in the city of Boston as a sports figure and as a community figure. And just trading him out the door, you just can't do that if you're the Celtics. But the reality is there's a better player than Jaylen Brown out there in the NBA landscape who's disgruntled, who's about to be traded. And the Celtics, looking at where their timeline's at right now, how they play on the basketball court, and where they're going to maximize the agenda of their business, the bottom line of their business, the Celtics' business on court of winning basketball games and even building a roster to win more basketball games going into the future. If they are to optimize and maximize their window, they must consider moving Jaylen Brown for Giannis Antetokounmpo, because that would be an upgrade to the bottom line of the Celtics. And again, it's nothing personal to Jaylen Brown. Absolutely love Jaylen Brown. He's taught us a lot of lessons, inspired us over the years, won the city of Boston a championship, the Celtics franchise a championship, and the entire fan base. He's been here for 10 years, but that's even, to me, people could go into a reason of that's why you can't trade Jaylen Brown because of his tenure in Boston. There's another side of, have the best days of his tenure already happen.
Yeah.
It's possible. And that's, again, that's not throwing any bad sentiment towards the Celtics and Brown going into the future. But right now, if the Celtics trade for Giannis, could there be more titles versus if the Celtics keep Jaylen Brown? Is 2024 just it?
And I'll get this sound on tape. The New York Knicks winning the NBA championship has accelerated and put the Eastern Conference in full-on aggressive mode. I mean, I think that you're going to be looking at the most competitive the Eastern Conference has looked in a very long time, with teams just improving. I mean, you look over already with Washington already adding to their team with Trae Young, Anthony Davis, and you can assume that they'll be adding AJ DeBonsa to that roster with the first pick. And then you look at the Indiana Pacers that will be leveling up their roster. You look at Philadelphia, who already claims reign over the Boston Celtics. There are 4 teams right now that can claim that they are better than the Boston Celtics and have evidence to do so. The New York Knicks, Philadelphia 76ers, and I would say even the Cleveland Cavaliers or the Detroit Pistons, but that's up for debate. I mean, right now the only ones that,
let's
all
slow
right,
down on those
all right,
teams.
the only two that you can say,
Even the Sixers, it's like, all
yes.
right, like
Hey,
Joel Embiid gonna like he
well,
showed up for 2 weeks.
why not put that pressure on Brad Stevens? Right now, the New York Knicks and the Philadelphia 76ers have every right to say that they are better than the Boston Celtics.
Look, I'm all for like as much as that pains me coming from Celtic Nation.
You,
It's
in my
true.
20,
I mean, like you beat us in a playoff series.
yeah, in my 23 years of life, I didn't think that sentence would come out of my mouth.
But
And
like we're really like, how did we get here? 2024 we won the title, and I say we, the Celtics won the title, but afterwards, like you lose to the Knicks, Tatum tears his Achilles, you lose to the Sixers, you blow a 3-1 lead. You don't just lose to the Sixers. Like, say we lost to the Sixers in 6 games and it's like, we were outplayed, outmatched. Like, you're up 3-1. You blow a 3-1 lead if you're the Celtics. And then you go on to watch the New York Knicks win a championship when realistically we were thinking going into the playoffs, the Celtics were going to stop that ish. We thought the Celtics, like, this is going to be the revenge year. Like, Jaylen Brown's talking them up. Like, here we go into the playoffs. Let's beat the Sixers so we can play the Knicks. And we were all like, all right, when we play the Knicks, we don't meet the Knicks. We're like the Steelers in 2018, where all the Steelers fans are chirping to the Patriots fans going, oh, just wait when we get into the AFC Championship together. Just wait. And then they lose to the Jags at home. That's kind of what it felt like from a Celtics perspective, where we're going, rematch with the Knicks, here we go. And then we're not even there to play them, period. And then we're left with the Sixers who can't do anything. They're swept. And then we have to watch the Knicks hold up the trophy, the Larry O'Brien trophy. Like, I thought about that in 2025 going, like, the Knicks holding up the trophy, would that take some steam out of the Celtics holding it up in 2024? And I was like, no. Everybody gets their moment and everybody has their like, oh, well, we had this. You can't take it away from us. But looking at it, it's just like, how many gut punches can Celtic Nation take right now? Because
you're the
like
banner
we went
behind
from
you is now yellow.
2024 unbeatable team, everyone's chasing us, to so are we going to trade for Giannis? Like we're like, you realize where we're at? It's like we're talking about the Celtics trading for Giannis, and they might actually do it 2 seasons after they just won the title. And it might actually net them more titles. That's what I'm saying. Like, that's why I'm excited. I don't like I love Brown and Tatum, and I see the progression. They've won a title together, and I go, are they going to win more, or is Giannis going to give them a better chance? And if Giannis is on the roster, like from a basketball perspective, coming from Celtic Nation, it gives me a little more like, whoa, this is a whole different look, and this could be very dominant moving forward into the future for the Celtics. But that's where we're at this moment in time. I'm just coming from a Celtic Nation perspective at the end of this. I feel like, I don't know, like we're living like in a different reality or something right now. Like it just doesn't feel like this is what, like covering the NBA, following the NBA, like you got to be ready to go spin in a whirlpool for a while, because you're going to be all over the place.
Yeah, I mean, right now I think that this is just the best opportunity available for Boston. If they want to stick with Jaylen Brown and Derek White and that being their core and retooling around them, obviously that is very possible. And do I think the Celtics can get themselves back up to a championship caliber without trading for Giannis? Definitely. If they make the right moves with mid-level exceptions, make the right moves with the trade exceptions as well, and are able to build a rotation around and below the starting lineup and around Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, 1,000%, I think they could be back in contention in the East without adding Giannis Antetokounmpo. However, if you add Giannis Antetokounmpo, there is without a doubt in my mind that they will be in contention in the East again. And without a doubt in my mind, that opens the window as long as Giannis wants to stay here. Obviously, the news of him wanting to sign an extension in Boston will help that cause and will open that window for that 4-year span. And if that matches up with what Jason Tatum's contract is, you could be looking at this team being in a sustainable position of contention for the next 3 to 4 years. But if things go south with Jaylen Brown and Derek White next year, you're going to be looking to retool, and that window might be closed on this era of Boston basketball, and we might be looking to put a new team around Jason Tatum, and that might lead to tougher conversations where draft capital might be involved for Jaylen Brown. And
Regardless, within this situation, interesting days are ahead for the Celtics and the NBA. Always the NBA, of course, but then some teams, they kind of middle everywhere, around the, I shouldn't say everywhere, but just around the center of the pack. And the Celtics right now, they're more towards the top, but man, are there some interesting decisions to be made going into the future. And I gotta say, we'll be here. We'll be here to cover those here on the Forever Green Sports Podcast. But folks, that is going to do it for us here today on the FGS podcast. Our first pre-recorded podcast here, not live, but pre-recorded. So a couple more editing feats going on in here, but that is going to do it here for us today. Of course, I'm your host, Seamus Zarlingo, alongside of me, Mr. Nick Franco, and now we'll be waiting for the Giannis news to come up. We'll be live with you guys going ahead into the future. So don't forget to miss us or catch us on the Forever Green Sports social media platforms, Instagram, and of course YouTube, where you're watching right now. So don't forget to like, subscribe, and go hit up the IG, of course. But that is going to do it for us today. As I always say, thank you all for watching, and
go Giannis, go green, forever green, for forever Giannis.
ciao.